Now you will hear from Doris Wagner, a theologian and former nun. Doris's words come from her experience, one that has made her a champion for those who've been silenced. Doris.
I became a nun more than 16 years ago. But after living through various kinds of abuse, I decided to leave. And that is now 8 years ago. So today I'm not a nun anymore, yet I'm a friend of countless inspiring and outspoken nuns, wonderful people like the ones you see here. And like them, I'm worried about the current state of the church. Something is fundamentally flawed in our church. The trust in our leaders is eroding, tensions are rising, and more people are leaving the church. And why is that? At first glance, there is no one single issue. There seem to be many issues. But as soon as you take a closer look, it becomes quite evident that in fact there is one single issue. Take sexual abuse as an example. The abuse has shaken many faithful Catholics to their ground. But when you dig only a little deeper, it becomes quite evident that what really leads them to lastingly distrust their leaders, distrust their bishops, and leave the church is not only the abuse, it's the cover-up of abuse. Because it is the cover-up that has never really been cleared up. And there is not much hope it ever will be. Very few bishops have been held accountable. A tribunal that would serve that purpose has never been installed for reasons that have never been sufficiently explained. And in what other ways bishops are being held accountable is not exactly transparent. Take another example, one we have been speaking about the whole morning, the whole day, women. At first glance, more and more women are upset about the systematic exclusion from leadership and decision-making positions in the church. Yet again, it's not only the exclusion. You need only to dig a little deeper into the matter to see what is worse than the exclusion is the way in which that exclusion is justified and enforced, despite an impressive range of really convincing arguments to be made in favor of leadership positions for women in the church. A perfect example of this, I think many of you may have seen it, was when Sister Katharina Ganz challenged Pope Francis on the matter during the audience of the UESG in May this year. She made an excellent point based on the actual pastoral necessity of our time as well as on the way Jesus treated women. And the Pope, he gave a long winding answer that ended in the quite disputable claim that it was divine revelation that was to be blamed for the fact that women are not ordained in the church. And what's the worst part of it was there was no dialogue. The Pope simply cut her short with a shamefully condescending and actually weak statement. So what is that one single issue? You may have guessed it. The one single issue that is behind all the other issues in our church is the inefficient leadership of our church. Or to be actually more precise, it's not our leaders, it is the dysfunctional and outdated constitution of the church. When we look at our church, at how positions of power are distributed among its members, when we look at the church's justice system, at who gets to make major decisions and who gets to define the church's teaching and politics on any matter, even the church's teaching on the very concept of femininity, all that is tied back exclusively to senior male clergy, just as it has been since the early Middle Ages. Since then, right up until today, the church's constitution is a textbook example of a two-estate system in which the clergy are ranking as rulers, while we lay people are ranking as peasants. As lay people, we simply don't have a right to have a say in our church. There's no church parliament. We can't vote. We have no means to get a say in legislation. We cannot appeal to an independent church court because such a thing doesn't exist. We have no right of information on most matters, and basically, we don't have enforceable rights at all. Our role can be neatly summed up as follows: listen, obey, and pay. And that becomes even more absurd when you consider that ordained men form only a super tiny proportion of our church. Less than 0.1% of our church are male clergy. And to carry this to the extreme, those ordained men need no approval from us lay people. They need no approval from the people they guide, because their legitimacy derives solely from their superiors, ultimately from the Pope. And that last point for me is crucial. That's really the issue. Because there are some people who believe the church has already an excellent instrument to involve lay people in decision-making processes, namely synods. And I don't believe that for a very simple reason. Even the decisions concerning synods are all tied back to clergy. It is the bishop's decision if, when, and how a synod should be held in his diocese, and who is allowed to participate, mainly clergy. And the bishop is not bound to do what the synod voted for, precisely because his legitimacy does not derive from the lay people in his diocese, but from the Pope. He is not accountable to his people. A parish priest is not accountable to his parish. A bishop is not accountable to the lay people in his diocese. So basically, even synods are just another instrument of power in the hands of our bishops. So to sum it up, our church is in crisis because it is pretending that following a medieval constitution with a two-estate system would be a good way of governing an international organization of the 21st century with more than 1 billion members. It's a very down-to-earth point that needs to be made here. That simply won't work. We are actually witnessing how that system is failing right in front of our eyes. That's actually what we are witnessing in the abuse crisis. We are witnessing this system to fail. How can we regard democracy, separation of powers, a fair proportion of offices held by women as basic standards of good governance call for them when it comes to developing countries, and somehow pretend that wouldn't apply to the church? It's ridiculous. There's a very obvious link between the accumulation of power and the abuse of power. Anywhere, in any nation or institution, a mentality which refuses to share power equally between men and women, between people of various races, cultures, and spiritual backgrounds, is not only contrary to our faith and the dignity of the children of God, it is also doomed to be powerless, insecure, and regressive, for it finds itself caught up in a constant battle against its own people. And this is why when we speak about shaping a new vision for the church, my vision begins with a new constitution. One that allows for fair participation of all of the factions of the faithful in decision-making processes in the church. And to make that vision come true, we need a constitutional reform. And I'm fully aware how unlikely such a reform appears to be, precisely because it's our male clergy senior leadership who would need to bring it about. Yet I'm hopeful against all odds. First, because this is not my idea. I've adopted it from others. At various occasions in the course of the last year, I have heard people speak of a constitutional moment in our church, including experienced and influential members of the clergy, and including canon lawyers. I'm hopeful also because there's no other way. It is all too evident that a church that, after all we have gone through in the last decades, still decided to stick to a two-state system instead of equality is not only contrary to the dignity of the children of God, it has lost the true sense of its existence and its capacity to be a meaningful and credible advocate for justice and equality in our world. So, a constitutional reform might be our church's last chance to get back on track. There's but one thing we really urgently need to do. We need to stop playing along to our self-declared rulers. Please simply stop pretending they would be any closer to God than we are, or better informed on God's personal plans, or actually entitled by God to dismiss the needs and voices of ordinary people, to dismiss scientific findings and facts, and to dismiss theological research. In other words, stop to listen, obey, and pay. Stop even to plead and beg and hope our bishops would eventually lead the urgently needed change. That won't happen. We have hoped that would happen for so many years. It won't happen. We have to start to act ourselves. So instead of listening to excuses and diversions, we, the 99.9%, we have to speak. Stop the unilateral monologue and start a rich and constructive multilateral dialogue with all of our brothers and sisters. Instead of obeying the wishes of our bishops and waiting for their actions, we have to take on our own responsibility and do what we know is right. Everyone for himself or herself, and all of us together in a spirit of mutual respect and determination. And instead of paying for the perpetuation of the current clerical system, we have to start and fund people and projects that really deserve our support. Namely, initiatives that transform the church into a rich and diverse community in which everyone is respected and has a voice, and where everybody is treated the same way irrespective of the person concerned, and where the most vulnerable persons are the most cared for. That is what I hope for, so that eventually we will also have leaders, men and women, who are representatives of their people and accountable to their people, who are not rulers but servants of their community and credible advocates for equality and justice in the outside world, who are so urgently needed in this moment of history. Thank you.